The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here this morning to talk about what is happening here in Congress in regards to the budget proposal. You know, I can't believe that many of my Republican colleagues, many of which have larger number of folks on Medicaid, are proposing the largest cut to food assistance in the history of our country, the largest cut to Medicaid in our history of our country. And many are actually denying that they're even cutting it. That is a slap in the face of so many people that depend on it. You know, don't take it from me, but take it from the Congressional Budget Office and many others that continue to say that nearly 14 million Americans will lose their health care and thousands of people will be impacted by the proposal, the so-called reconciliation that is going through this chamber. We know that children and families will go hungry with this proposal. You know, our residents can't simply stop being hungry or stop being sick, Mr. Chair. For me, I know, being on the front lines of a community that continues to again be left behind with policies here in this chamber, I know that they feel very much that this budget is a betrayal to our families. And if it wasn't bad enough, this all is being done to give trillions of dollars, not billions or millions, but trillions of dollars in tax breaks to the billionaire class and the largest corporations. Corporations that do not need these tax breaks. But don't worry, there is a budget that got increased. That's the Pentagon, the defense budget, the war machine of the Pentagon budget. Can't pass an audit, 7 audits in a row. I read somewhere that in the most recent audit failure, the Pentagon could not account for half of its assets. Half. That's hundreds of billions of dollars that are unaccounted for. And many of my colleagues continue to talk about the deficit. I know this is a misnomer, but the Congressional Budget Office said the deficit's being increased by $3.8 trillion. So why isn't there this outcry of that number? But it always seems to be an outcry when we're trying to, again, feed children that are hungry or help make sure that people, again, no fault of their own getting sick, to get covered by Medicaid. The budget would cut crucial programs for the poor and working families. That is a fact. It's not being made up. It's right there. It's going to take food away from hungry children, let people die from the lack of health care coverage, and they're even cutting, again, trillions of dollars again, so that we can continue to fund a budget that can't pass an audit. You know, one of the amendments that I'm offering this morning, Mr. Chair, is one of the ones that says, hey, if the Pentagon can't pass an audit, then we shouldn't be able to fund them. You know, I really believe no money for Pentagon waste. When an amendment would prevent any funds, again, being allocated to this, when you talk about waste, when you talk about fraud, you look at the Pentagon budget. But instead, what did we do? We went to the most vulnerable. We went to the hungry. We went to the sick. Why? Because many of my colleagues in this chamber own stock in war manufacturing, Mr. Chair. That's a direct conflict of interest. So every time they increase the budget for defense, many of them are benefiting personally from that increase. No increases to helping the poor or helping the hungry, and many of which are in both Republican and Democratic districts. Again, many of my colleagues have a lot more people on Medicaid than my district does. But yet here we are gaslighting and misleading the public and saying, we're not cutting it. We're not doing this or that. How is that possible when the Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan agency that many of my colleagues on the other side have quoted themselves? Many of the people that are the so-called, I'm concerned about the deficit, you're increasing the deficit by $3.8 trillion. But put that aside, the cruelty of it, the cruelty of it. You know, I have an amendment in there that talks about the fact that we need to focus on reducing the rate of infant mortality. Why can't we work on that? That is a national crisis right now, infant mortality. We can do that by ensuring that Medicaid covers all prenatal and postnatal care. Why can't we support that? Why can't we make sure? I know over 40% of births in our country are covered by Medicaid, Mr. Chair. And again, I'm trying to propose these amendments to highlight the fact that these are very critical programs, no matter where you live in our country. We could also be ending child poverty and ensure that every child has the resources they need to reach their full potential. You know, we should be talking about these critical issues of funding these programs. It's our tax dollars going back to our neighbors who need it most. And instead of voting to make life easier, they're supporting polluters, corporations, and billionaires that do not need it.
Gentlewoman's time's expired.
Please, to all my colleagues, they won't ask Speaker Johnson or the President why they voted this year. They're going to ask you when you go back to your districts. So please do the right thing.
Recognizes the gentleman from